日对于中国资本市场来说是具有里程碑意义的一天。就在这一天 ，A 股被正式纳入 Msci 新兴市场指数。作为全球第2大股市，中国内地股市总市值约为8万亿美元，占全球股市总市值的10%。国际投资者对配置中国股票的需求日益迫切。A 股入摩，标志着中国 A 股市场朝着国际化方向又迈出了重要一步。Msci 是全球知名的指数编制公司，其推出的 Msci 股价指数广为投资人参考，是全球投资组合经理最常采用的基准指数。全球有超过13万亿美元的资金跟踪 Msci 指数，并做出投资决策。就在 A 股纳入 Msci 前夕，Msci 首席执行官亨利·费尔南德兹在北京接受了财新时间的专访。他表示，此轮 A 股入摩还只是象征性的一步，是让中国企业与海外资本互相熟悉、互相学习的第一步，为 Msci 下一步将 A 股更大比例的纳入打下基础。
China-related stock already accounted for about 30% of the emerging market index. So why is this less than 1% inclusion of A share important?
Well, as you said, a lot of international investors are already familiar with the Chinese story in the public equity markets, including investments into those Chinese companies that have listed shares outside of the country, which represent about 30% of the MSCI Emerging Market Index. What we're now referring to is the companies inside China that are not listed outside and represents quite a large number of companies that are doing business obviously in China and in the world. And that opportunity set is not yet, hasn't been yet totally being available to foreign investors. So this step is a small one, and it's a symbolic step because it's just the first step in trying to get the providers of capital, suppliers of capital around the world, which are the investors, and the users of capital, which are the companies, within the infrastructure of the country, the market infrastructure of the country, to come together and learn from one another and understand one another so that we can then open up the inclusions further and bigger in the next steps.
Mm-hmm. There is another 16% estimation which is more in keeping with China's share in the emerging market world. How do you see the situation going forward? Do you see, say, in 5 or 10 years that will happen?
Well, I am a believer that the opening of the capital markets of China to foreign investors will likely to happen faster than most people anticipate. And that is because with the continued incorporation of the Chinese real economy with the rest of the economy of the world, and with the new industries and sectors that China wants to promote, consumer sector, the technology sector, and the like, those sectors are more conducible and more appropriate for publicly traded capital, to go to. So I think that China as a global economy will need to have the financial systems that go with its position and stature in the global economy. So now, we obviously want to make sure that that process is smooth and stable, and therefore that incorporation of the financial assets of China into the global financial markets is going to take time. Will it be 5 to 10 years? I hope so, but we don't know yet.
Yeah, a BlackRock manager saying if we just go with this 0.8% inclusion, it's too little and too slow for their asset allocation into China.
So our view with our clients around the world is to tell them it is a small weight, less than 1%. It is a small step, but you have to begin to get knowledge, research, and experience in buying A shares. Because the markets of A shares are opening up. The progress of that reform will continue. And this is the time to build that experience and that knowledge and that expertise, as opposed to waiting until the markets are a big proportion of the emerging market index. Now, the reason that is important is, yes, in terms of weight, is a small weight, but in terms of the number of companies that are going into the index, it's not a small number. As you know, the emerging market index today has about 850 companies. This is pre-inclusion of the A-shares. If you put the 230 or so companies that are coming in, that's a large number of companies to understand, research, evaluate, and then make investments in. And over time, if we were to, when we are able to incorporate the mid-cap companies, there will be some over 600 or 700 companies from the China A-share market into the emerging market index. So that index will be made up of about half of companies coming from China, especially the A-share market of China. So our encouragement to our clients around the world is, this is the time to learn, to understand, to experience the process, build confidence and trust, because there are bigger steps coming in the near future.
You kind of emphasize foreign investors need to do their homework on assessing Chinese companies. What would be your message for foreign investors, and what would be your message for Chinese?
You know, China is opening up. China has a large number of companies, has incredible opportunities for investments. It's a market that is not highly correlated with the other markets. So for a lot of investors, it has, you know, significant diversification benefits. And it is here now. It's not in the future. It's here. It's happening this week, you know, in terms of the inclusion. And therefore, you have to get going immediately to understand the market, invest in the market, you know, because this process of further integration will typically accelerate as long as the reform program accelerates, which we believe it will. And you know, for Chinese is, you will be in the magnifying glass now. It's no longer retail investors in China, you know, being in the market. The market is going to be shared now between retail investors, institutional investors in China, and institutional investors and retail investors from outside of China. So, you know, the market structure eventually will change, will become more institutionalized. It will take a while, but it will become, you know, more institutionalized. For companies, my message is in China, the A-share companies, is you will now have another set of investors that are going to have different requirements. They're going to have different standards. Some of them are going to be stringent standards. You know, you got to get ahead of that. You got to listen to them. You got to understand them and adapt and change a lot of what you do in the management of your company in order to attract that additional capital that is coming, that is going to be a benefit for you, more capital, for your shareholders, higher price, right? And for your customer, because you'll be able to provide bigger investments and bigger opportunities for your customer.
作为一家10年前还遭遇被抛弃窘境的公司 ，MSCI 今天在全球市场占据的地位让人感叹。1998年，费尔南德兹接手 MSCI 之时 ，MSCI 作为华尔街投行摩根士丹利的子公司，还是一个成本中心。全球金融危机期间，摩根士丹利遭遇冲击，而 MSCI 急需资本进行并购以求增长。摩根士丹利董事会最终决定放手 MSCI， 让其成为独立的公司，以获取资本做必要的收购。对于2009年5月的这段出走经历，费尔南德兹坦言，当年其实还是希望 MSCI 留在摩根士丹利，但是事后看，这反而成为了对双方都最好的决定。
Can you briefly tell us how does MSCI evolve to today's form? Any major milestones? The name resonant with Morgan Stanley. How was history?
Yeah, so MSCI, when I took over MSCI some 22, 23 years ago, it was largely a cost center, you know, inside Morgan Stanley. And my intent at the time was to turn it into a business, a profitable business that could be sustainable, meaning making profits for investments and return of capital to its shareholders. And that's what we've achieved over that period of time. We started with one product line only, which were the market cap indices. Over time, you know, a few years later, we bought the company called Barra, which was equity, risk, and performance analytics. Then over time, we bought another company called RiskMetrics, which was multi-asset class risk and performance analytics. And over time, we bought another company in real estate performance attribution. So what we now have in MSCI, both through acquisitions and through organic growth, is a company that's, whose mission is to help power investment decisions in the world in all asset classes, with all types of managers of assets and owners of assets, in all the asset classes in the world.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned risk analytics. Right. I was talking to Larry Fink of BlackRock. They have this not say famous, but very powerful Aladdin risk management system. How does the system compare? What are the functionalities?
So our multi-asset class risk analytics are similar to Aladdin. They obviously vary in many respects. They have their own market position and we have our own market position, but we are the two leaders in the world in providing risk analytics to buy-side institutions, in many countries in the world.
Mm-hmm. Is there any kind of key decisions or difficulties you encountered while steering MSCI to today's?
Oh, there have been many. No company gets built from the low level that we started with without significant milestone. Some of those milestones were positive, and some of them were more challenging. We clearly, were a public company already during the financial crisis. We were still partly owned by Morgan Stanley, so that was a difficult period. But of every difficult period, there is always an opportunity. So we capitalize on those opportunities, have continued to grow the company to what it is today, which is a company listed in the New York Stock Exchange with a market cap of about $14 billion. So it's sizable, with a global footprint, and obviously in the middle of one of the most important industries in society, which is the investment management industry.
Why do you decide to jump out of Morgan Stanley?
At the time, we were a subsidiary of Morgan Stanley and the Capital Group, and we were looking for significant amount of capital from Morgan Stanley to make acquisitions. And Morgan Stanley had its own budgets to apply their capital to their own businesses, their trading businesses, their banking businesses, and the like. So they were not very willing to provide that additional capital to us. So the decision that was made by them and their board of directors was to free up MSCI as an independent, publicly traded company to seek its own capital for its own investments, rather than constrain it by not being able to provide capital, from the base of capital of Morgan Stanley. So that was the reason for that.
So do you feel initially happy about this, or initially not so happy, but turned out to be very happy?
It's the latter. At the beginning, I said, we were happy to stay within Morgan Stanley, and as a private company, so to speak, within a public company, it afforded us a lot of flexibility and the like. But it turned out to be one of the best decisions they made and we made, because it really did allow the company to grow and extend and project itself in a much bigger way that would have been the case if we had remained as a company owned by Morgan Stanley and the Capital Group.
Mm-hmm. Talking about indexing business, one can't ignore the huge rise of passive investing after the financial crisis. Do you think this trend this shift from active to passive investing here to stay?
It will continue for sure. It's a secular trend or a structural trend in the world. But it's not in lieu of active management. It's in addition to active management. There will be investors that will want to replicate markets, whether that's geography or a type of market, like an emerging market, or it's an investment strategy like quality investing or minimum volatility investing, momentum investing. So they will want to use indices to be the basis of their portfolios in order to invest in that fashion. The same thing with active managers. So it'll continue to grow. I think that the amount of growth can be higher relative to the total pool of investing and relative to active management. And the important thing about all of this is that given that it's both active and passive for the benefit of the investor, what it has done is freed up a lot of those investors, whether it's institutional or individual investors, to spend more time on asset allocation, because that is the most fundamental value in investing, is how are you allocating assets between equities and bonds or private equities or real estate or commodities or the like.
近年来，国际资本市场对于责任投资理念表现出越来越浓厚的兴趣。责任投资是指在投资过程中，在财务回报的考量之外，将环境、社会和公司治理等因素纳入投资的评估决策中。随着 ESG 投资理念的发展，包括 Msci 在内的国际主流指数公司都推出了 ESG 指数以及衍生投资产品。费尔南德兹表示 ，ESG 指数能够帮助人们理解企业哪里做得好，哪里做得不好，帮助投资者理解投资这些公司的风险和收益，而这是符合股东、客户和公众的长远利益的。
You are a very strong advocate on ESG. How do you persuade people that this is really something essential for companies rather than window dressing scene?
Well, I think what happens is that ESG investing is part of a bigger, much bigger trend in the world of the sustainability of all of our institutions over time. Whether it's political, cultural, religious, economic, or financial institutions, the societies that we live in are demanding that those institutions become accountable to them and understand the benefits that they're providing to society as opposed to harms that they're providing to society. And we see that all over. We in the investment industry need to become more accountable to what are the benefits that investing is providing to society, what are the harms that are creating to society, whether it's an environmental harm or a social harm or a governance harm. These institutions need to be more accountable. So therefore, in my mind, this is about the preservation of the way of life and the preservation of the economic systems that we have built in the world. If we don't make the economic and financial system, particularly the capital allocation system, accountable to the benefits of society and understand the harm that they create, this system is not going to last a long time. And therefore, we need to do that accountability or that process in order to ensure that the suppliers of capital, the providers of capital, are allocating capital to the users of capital that are going to be using it for the benefit of society and the benefit of the company and the benefit of the shareholders, but the medium to long-term benefit. We cannot have a world in which companies are discriminating or ignoring corporate governance practices or polluting the environment. Those days are gone. Society is going to find out about it because of social media, and they're going to become very intolerant of those. So it is organizations like ourselves, which are in the middle of that investing process, that need to provide the leadership and the tools necessary to analyze those investments in the context of those sustainable factors such as environmental and social and governance factors.
Is Chinese companies particularly lacking in this front?
China is still early on, and the same thing, Chinese companies are still early on in measuring the ESG factors, in their companies, measuring and managing their social policies, their environmental policies, and all of that. So this is how we come in. We come in and we provide ratings of companies for them to understand, what they're doing well, what they're not doing well. We sell them, these ratings to investors, so the investors understand what are the benefits of investing in that company, what are the risks that can come. So if you have a company that is heavily polluting the environment, that's a risk. That over time is going to come back to be a detriment to that company. So we want investors to understand that. So we are in the nexus of that process between investors and the companies that are looking for capital, and providing the tools to analyze, what are the factors in which investors should be making decisions on, and how are the companies being managed, for the benefit of the long-term benefits of their shareholders, their clients, and the public at large.
费尔南德兹1958年生于墨西哥，早年曾先后就读于乔治城大学、普林斯顿大学以及斯坦福大学。早在1979年，他第一次来到中国，在当时相对更开放的南方探索了1个月。成为 Msci 掌门人之后，伴随着持续数年的 A 股入魔努力，他也成为了中国的常客。对于中国近年来的发展历程，他有着怎样的观察？在他看来，A 股入魔又能在多大程度上加速中国资本市场市场化、法治化、国际化的改革进程呢？
Shifting on to China, you first came to China in 1979. You must have some unique observation on China. And how do you look at China's evolvement over the past several decades?
Yeah, so I came to China, in the middle of the summer of 1979, and as a student of foreign policy and international affairs and economics that I was at the time, I saw at the time what the country was doing in terms of opening up and in terms of creating a better economy and all of that. Those were early days, but I said, I want to go see that. I want to experience that firsthand. I want to be in the country doing that. So I came for about a month. At the time, it was only the southern part of China that was, more easy to travel. So I spent, a lot of that time then, and it was, quite an incredible sight. There were not a lot of cars on the road. People were dressed. This was the summer, so mostly either black pants or blue pants and white shirts. So bicycles all over the place. I think GDP per capita in China was like $300, per person at the time. And then you move forward. Obviously, I've been coming to China ever since, frequently, every year or every few years. And you move forward to the country that it is today, which is the second largest economy in the world, second or third largest financial markets in the world, a great deal of prosperity. The infrastructure is an envy of the rest of the world, and so on and so forth, So you can see over that 30-40-year span the incredible changes that have taken place in the country, and we're not done, right? China is still growing and progressing, and it will be, among the best economies in the world.
Mm-hmm. Reform is a perennial topic here in China. It seems that external pressure is a good way to spur reform in China, especially in recent years or months. How do you see this external influence, or actually two-way kind of exchange between China and the world, especially the US?
In my view, China is always trying to balance reform on one hand, and stability of the country on the other hand, stability of socially, culturally, politically, economically, financially. They're always, aspiring for a stable world. So that's the tension. So I would say that yes, the country and the officials in the country respond to needs or drive for reform from the outside world. But I would say even more importantly, they respond to reform from inside the country, much more than from the outside world. That is a topic that is not well covered, not well understood, because clearly what a lot of the media talks about is the needs or the pressure by the outside world, outside of the country, to China. But I would think, and it's my experience, that the internal pressures and the internal needs for reform are bigger than outside. So that's what think about the financial markets. Everyone talks about the rest of the world is putting pressure on China to reform the financial markets. It is more important the needs inside China to reform the financial markets than the outside forces, because China, as the second largest economy of the world, cannot continue to be that without very modern financial markets, whether it's the banking market or the equity market or the bond market or the foreign exchange market. That flexibility, that ability to allocate capital on a bottom-up basis as opposed to top-down, now that is going to become even more important in the future, because many of the industries that China wants to promote, such as technology, consumer goods, healthcare, consumer staples and the like, right? All of those industries are more geared towards an allocation of capital from the private sector, from the public markets, publicly traded equities or public bonds. So that's why I am very hopeful and very optimistic that the capital markets of China will develop much more rapidly than people think, because the economy is going to need those markets much more in the future than it has needed them in the past.
Mm-hmm. You talk to many Chinese officials. I think Ray Dalio, people like him, have very nice word to say on the current generation of Chinese, at least financial officials. How do you reflect on their capability compared to Western officials?
Well, first of all, I've always been impressed by the level of education, academic education, by a lot of people in China, especially in finance and investments. You rarely meet anybody who doesn't have a master's degree or a PhD. So either from the country or from outside of the country. So secondly, compared to a lot of officials in many other countries around the world, they have a longer term perspective. In many countries in the West, there is a significant amount of short-termism, short-term. So many of the goals are very short-term driven. The third thing that has struck me is how pragmatic and practical the officials are. Well, in other places around the world, particularly other emerging markets, a lot of people are ideological, and it's harder for them to be pragmatic. Three, people in China are highly entrepreneurial, including the finance officials in government. They're not rigid, they're flexible, they're entrepreneurial. So I think that's, that when you look at a country like this, that's why you have to put a lot of hope that with that combination of skill sets and attributes, that the country will continue to do well for generations to come.
One last question, personal. You just turned 60, I think last month or this month?
Well, May, yeah, so this month. Yeah.
May, yeah. How do you reflect on your 40-year career and 20 years heading MSCI? Any lessons for younger generations or others?
So first of all my friends tell me 60 is the new 40. So I'm not ready for the 60s. I am still feeling in my 40s, right? So, secondly, I feel very satisfied and very proud of what I've done so far, but it's still ways to go. I went from being a political refugee and an immigrant in America, in my 20s, to being the chief executive officer in the investment of a company in the investment industry that is global, and it has a big impact in what we do. So all within a 40-year period, in this case obviously living in America. So if you follow your passion, if you follow your dreams, you are able to achieve things like I did. It's not easy, it's not without its obstacles and roadblocks and all of that, but that's what makes it fun. You gotta overcome those obstacles. So it's been great, but it's still MSCI and myself are still on the ground floor of what is possible to achieve, and I hope to be coming to China for the next at least 20-30 years.